In 1769, Mayer was 26 years old. He was a tall, impressive-looking man of pronounced Hebraic type. His expression, if rather sly, was good-natured. In accordance with the custom of those times, he wore a wig, although, as he was a Jew, he was not allowed to have it powdered, and in accordance with the customs of his race, he wore a small, pointed black beard. When he took stock of his business and his little property, he could say to himself with justice that he not merely administered his wealth intelligently, but substantially increased it in the years following the founding of his business. Although he could not be classified among the wealthy men of Frankfurt, or even among the wealthy Jews of that city, he could assuredly be described as well off, and was in a position to think of starting a family. Mayer married Gutala Schnapper, the 17-year-old daughter of a respectable merchant in the Judengasse, in 1770. The dowry in which Mayer received was a substantial one, making it possible for the new couple to buy the building in which they lived, and in which Mayer operated his Red Shield firm, something he had long wanted. His business practices increased as well. Realizing that he could not provide for a family by selling rare coins to monarchs on a sporadic basis, Mayer began the practice that most would define as an exchange merchant.
He acted as a goldsmith and money changer, the practice of exchanging coins and currency of one country for that of another. It was the task of the firm to exchange coins of every kind, that is, in exchanging gold and silver for the appropriate amount of copper currency known as coarse money. In the chaotic conditions prevailing in Germany at the time, divided as the country was into innumerable small principalities, cities, and spiritual jurisdictions, all of which had their own currency systems, the business of money changing offered ample opportunities of profit, since everybody was compelled, before undertaking even the shortest journey, to call for the assistance of the exchange merchant.
Many fairs were held in Frankfurt, and the market was always busy with people conducting trade. This brought in many different forms of currency from all over Europe. It was from this business of money changing that Mayer began to steadily profit. However, he did not use the exchange profits to enlarge his exchange business, but rather invested the money he made into his rare coin business. As his profits grew, he began to buy out needy coin collectors, taking advantage of his expert knowledge in the rarest pieces. The fact that he was made court factor by Prince William no doubt played a large part in doing business, as it was seen as a mark of trust. This mark of trust by perhaps the wealthiest man in Germany would act as a stepping stone, eventually leading Mayer Amschel Rothschild and his family down a road paved with even greater wealth and prominence.
Prince William's father, Frederick II of Hesse-Kassel, had married a daughter of King George III of England, and the two rulers used their family relationships to consolidate their dynastic and political interests. The sale of soldiers for service under foreign governments, practiced by so many German princes at this time, was an important part of their activities. England being particularly accustomed to using hired mercenaries to conduct foreign battle.
These hired soldiers were called Hessians and were used on the side of England in wars including the American Revolution.
Frederick II fell out with his wife, his father William VIII, and his father-in-law King George III of England, because he changed over from the Protestant to the Catholic faith. In order to protect his grandson from his father's influence, the old Landgrave William VIII decided that William was to be kept away from Kassel and allotted the county of Hanau to him. The province of Hanau was located near Frankfurt. When William relocated to Hanau and became crown prince in that country, General von Estorff was employed in William's court. As a young man, Rothschild became an acquaintance with von Estorff while working at the Oppenheim Bank in Hanover, procuring rare and valuable coins for the general's collection. General von Estorff aroused in Prince William his interest in coin collecting, a hobby from which the wealthy prince gained much pleasure and satisfaction. It was von Estorff who first mentioned to the prince a young man named Mayer Amschel Rothschild, who many times procured for him rare coins while an employee of the Oppenheim Bank, but who currently worked for himself as a coin dealer in Frankfurt. In 1769, after several years of doing business with the prince and members of his court on a small scale, Rothschild was appointed crown agent to the Prince of Hesse-Hanau. At that time, titles and honors were of far greater practical importance than they are today. Unless a person had some kind of prefix or suffix, all doors were closed to him, and everyone who did not have a title of nobility by the accident of birth would endeavor to obtain an office. Prince William's grandfather, Landgrave William VIII, died in 1760. William's father, Frederick, assumed the government at Cassel, and William became crown prince in accordance with the will of his grandfather, independent ruler of the small country of Hanau, with its 50,000 inhabitants, to whose interest he devoted himself with the greatest zeal. William was a thoroughly active person, and was never idle for a moment. When he assumed the government of his small territory, Prince William was in a position to play the role of absolute ruler, and his highly marked individuality immediately made itself felt. The business of renting out Hessian soldiers to England increased in the years leading up to the American Revolution. The prince would concern himself with the smallest details of the soldiers' equipment and would pass the new recruits, giving them precise instructions as to the length of the pigtail to be worn and how clean the uniforms were to be maintained. One reason he was particularly anxious that his troops should look good was that he could make a great deal of money by following the example of his father and grandfather in selling his men to England. His father, Frederick II, had in this way gradually transferred to England 12,000 Hessians, and amassed an enormous fortune in the process. In the same way, William sold to England in 1776 the small Hanau regiment which he had just formed. The conditions of such subsidy contracts were exceedingly oppressive to England, as they had to pay substantial compensation for any man who was killed or wounded. Prince William also increased his property considerably by these means. After deducting all expenses, he realized a net profit of about 3,500,000 marks from this business, and there being no distinction between the public and the private purse of a prince, this money was at his absolute personal disposal. Prince William continued to accumulate large capital sums, and he refrained from bringing over to the continent substantial proportions of the subsidy moneys, which he invested in England itself. England did not always pay in cash, but often in bills of exchange that had to be discounted. For this purpose, the prince and his officials had to employ suitable middlemen in large commercial centers like Frankfurt. Purchases and sales had to be carefully regulated to prevent the market from being suddenly flooded with bills, allowing the rate of exchange to be consequently depressed. This work fell to the various crown agents and factors, of which Rothschild was made in 1769. His personal relationship with Prince William was at first exceedingly slender, for however enlightened he might be, a ruling prince did not easily associate with a Jew. Only long years of useful service could break down such natural obstacles. In the first instance, men of business had to deal with the crown prince's officials, and to get on good terms with them was a primary essential for anybody who wanted to do business with the prince. Rothschild brought to his work a certain natural flair for psychology, and he always endeavored to create personal links wherever he possibly could. He naturally made a special point of being on good terms with the Hanau Treasury officials. One of the most influential members of the Crown Prince's civil service was an official at the Treasury named Carl Frederick Buderus. Buderus displayed the greatest zeal in looking after the financial interests of the Crown Prince. Rothschild increasingly tried to be on good terms with Buderus, the official who was closest to Prince William. However, Buderus did not yet have sufficient confidence in the financial resources of the Frankfurt Jew Rothschild to entrust to him anything except the smaller transactions. On October 31st, 1785, Prince William's father, Frederick II, died, a complete shock and surprise to the young prince. Therefore, Prince William of Hanau accordingly succeeded to the throne of Hesse-Kassel as Landgrave William IX. On reading his father's will, he learned with pleasure that the country was free of debt and that he had come into an enormous property. The subsidies received for the sale of mercenaries had been most profitably invested, and estimates of the value of the inheritance varied between $20 and $60 million, unparalleled sums for those times. The new Landgrave united his private property at Hanau with his inherited possessions and moved his residence from Hanau, which was close to Frankfurt, to Kassel, which lay much farther north. In order to remind the new Landgrave, who had now become arguably the wealthiest monarch in Europe, of his existence, Rothschild visited Kassel in 1787, bringing with him a remarkably beautiful collection of coins, medals, and jeweled gold chains, and offered these wares to the Landgrave at exceptionally low prices. The prince appreciated the real value of the coins and eagerly did business with Rothschild. Rothschild used this opportunity to submit the humble request that he should not be forgotten if any future bills of exchange required discounting. He had deliberately made a loss on these small deals in order to secure the chance of more profitable business in the future. But 2 years passed without his services being asked for, and he stood by enviously seeing other agents getting bills to discount. Rothschild had closely followed the business dealings of these agents, and had thought out a very useful way of transacting such matters if he should be entrusted with them. In 1789, Rothschild wrote a letter to Landgrave William, in which he referred to the services that he had rendered during a long course of years as Hesse-Hanau Crown Agent, and asked to be considered in connection with the bills of exchange business on a credit basis. In order to put himself on a level with his rivals, he promised always to do business at a price at least as high as that offered by any other banker in Kassel. Buderus, whose position in the meantime had been steadily increasing in importance, often had occasion to travel between Kassel and Frankfurt on business matters. Rothschild would often get advance information of Buderus's journeys to Frankfurt so that he can go and see him when he came. Buderus was gradually influenced by Rothschild's persuasive powers. He urged Buderus, if occasion should arise, to recommend him to the Landgrave for substantial dealings. In 1794, when Rothschild was 51 years old, an opportunity for this finally occurred. The capital sums invested by Prince William in England had grown to such a considerable amount that the Landgrave gave instructions that a portion of them should be brought over to Kassel. In addition to several Frankfurt banking firms, Buderus put forward the name of the Crown Agent Rothschild as suitable for carrying through this transaction. Rothschild carried through the matters entrusted to him not merely conscientiously, but with a shrewd eye to gain, and the profits which he derived from them increased considerably. His dealings with the court at Kassel soon became very active, and he began doing much bigger business with Landgrave William. It was necessary for the young Rothschild household that business should increase, for by 1792 Rothschild and his young bride Gutella had 10 children, 5 daughters and 5 sons. His sons were born in 1773, 1774, 1775, 1788, and 1792. They were given the names Amschel, Solomon, Nathan, Carl, and James, respectively.